If you are an Enscape beginner, you have come to the right place. And that's because in this video, I'm going to show every single option that Enscape has, which you need to utilize. I myself have been using Enscape for over 4 years, and I've explored all the in and outs of this software. So you're wondering why you should use Enscape in the first place. Maybe you're not sure which software you have to use in order to achieve high quality looks for your rendering project. Let me just tell you that firms like Foster & Partners and Big use Enscape. And if Enscape fulfill all their needs in their project, obviously Enscape will fulfill your needs as well. So Enscape is totally free for students, and if you just want to try it out, Enscape has a free 14-day trial that you can use. Alright, so let's get into the system requirements for using Enscape. So this is pretty much what Enscape has put up in their website in terms of the minimum requirements in order to use Enscape. I myself have a pretty medium setup, which you can find in the description, and Enscape runs pretty smooth. So I've tried a lot of different software, but believe me that Enscape has the lowest threshold in order to use it and requires the least amount of computer power in order to achieve realistic results. Here I have a modeling of an office building that later on you will see how we will achieve a realistic look in Enscape. Right now we're in the SketchUp tab, but Enscape can work with many different modeling software: ArchiCAD, Rhino, Vectorworks, Revit. 90% of the tools are applicable amongst all the other modeling software. So to get started, I want to introduce you to the Enscape ribbon that it should show up in SketchUp. If it has shown up, you can go to Views, Toolbars, and then just turn on Enscape here, and this ribbon will show up. Okay, so the most important button here in order to start Enscape is obviously the first one. So once I click it, you can see that it's going to take a few seconds for Enscape to start up. And now we can do a full screen mode for Enscape, and in just a few seconds, it should fill up our screen with the object that we have in SketchUp. So this is what the Enscape window shows without any assets, without any other modeling, just the raw modeling that we had, and with an HDRI turned on, which you're gonna get into that later, which is honestly pretty good for a quick setup. This is why Enscape is the best software, in my opinion, to use for conceptual work, which you just need fast output, and you can do that with Enscape perfectly. I would suggest, if you have a chance to use 2 monitors when you're using Enscape. That way you have the SketchUp window in one side, and then you have the Enscape window in the other side. I myself use 2 monitors when I'm working in my usual projects, but because I'm screen recording right now, I will have to only use 1 monitor. So in order for the best workflow for this to work, you can either split the window into 2 like this, or you can have the same aspect ratio and just keep it on the side here. So this can work as well if you want the quick workflow in 1 monitor. All right, so what we're gonna get into first is these 2 buttons that are next to the Enscape ribbon. Now, in order to navigate with Enscape, it's pretty easy. If you've ever played any online games or anything like that, you can move around the WASD, and then you can just change your vision while holding down any mouse button and looking around. If you want to go faster, you can use the Shift key, and if you want to go even faster, you can use the Control key in Windows. So this is pretty easy in order to navigate. Some other useful tips to navigating in the Enscape window is if you double click anywhere, you can see that it will zoom in into that area. This is to move faster, obviously. And other than that, there's not much into it for navigation. So the other 2 buttons here are pretty good because they make the whole workflow very easy. It does real-time visualization. So right here, you have the live updates, which basically, if you change something in the model here in SketchUp, let's say we remove this row, you will see that it will automatically update in the Enscape window as well. And we can go back to it. And this just shows real-time rendering as you're making changes in SketchUp. But if you don't have a powerful enough PC, I would suggest you turn it off, make all the changes that you would have to make in the model, and then turn it on once again to make the updates. That way it doesn't take as much computing power as if you leave it on all the time. The other one is to synchronize views. So whatever you're viewing in the SketchUp tab, you will also view in the Enscape window as well. I usually don't use this because what I like to do is I like to set up my camera in one position in Enscape, and then if I want to do some other modeling here, I can work around in the SketchUp window and still not change the composition of the image that I want to achieve in Enscape. So I usually turn the synchronized views option off. All right, so let's get into some more fun stuff. This is basically some introduction and basic navigation. Now we're gonna get into the material library. So this is wonderful if you're just starting out a rendering, because you have almost 400 ready-to-use materials in Enscape, which makes your workflow and your life a lot easier. Believe me, I used Enscape when Enscape didn't have a material library, and it was such a hassle to get some materials, import them, put the maps and all of that. But now Enscape handles most of the materials by itself. Right here, you can find many different categories that you can explore. And what you can also do, if you like a material that you're going to use often, you can basically click the star icon and it will put in a separate category which has all your favorite materials in it. So let's say I want to change this brick material. So I'm going to go to the brick material section, which I already added, and I'm going to choose, let's say, this brick. And I'm going to import it. So once the tick here shows up, it means that the material has been imported in SketchUp. We can close that down. That we're going to go to the in model materials and we can find the brick material that we imported. So it's this one. So now that we have selected it, we can go here and select the walls that we want to use this brick material in. So this is just a quick example. And if we go up close, you can see that this material is quite high quality and it has already some depth in it. So it's very realistic. These are PBR materials that already have all the maps set up in them. But if you still wish you want to make changes in the materials that Enscape offers, you can do that pretty easily. So let's just go back and change the brick material the way it was before. And let's try to make some changes in the brick material that is already existing. Alright, so we can just use another brick material that the Enscape library offers in order to really capture what I want to achieve here. So I'm going to import this one. We're going to find it in the model section of the SketchUp materials. We're going to select it and we can just apply all the walls in SketchUp. So this wall as well, here and here as well. So this pretty much every wall that had brick before now has a different type of brick material that we imported from Enscape. Let's say we want to make changes to this material. So I'm going to open the Enscape material editor and I'm going to select with the Alt key this brick. As you can see, the material editor is divided into three main sections, which is the materials list with all the materials that are in the model right now. This is the material presets that you can find carpet preset, which automatically opens up all the settings that you can use for carpet, for clear coat, for foliage, for grass, for self-illuminated materials, and for water. These are very useful for these specific material, but in this case, we don't need any of them and we can just leave it at generic. Here is the section where we have all the material parameters. In the albedo section, this is basically the color or the main texture that we're going to use throughout our material. If I open this up, you can see how our brick material looks like flat in a flat PNG or whatever format you're using for your materials. And then you have some options. You can change the brightness of it, make it darker, or you can leave it at 100% as it is. If you want to change the color and give it a fade or a tint, you can just click here. And let's say in my case, I want to make it a bit darker. I can go to some orange type of tint here and I can select what color I want to go over it with. So as you can see, this looks much better than the previous color and I can quickly change the color of my material right here. Now the displacement map is what gives the material depth and kind of has it a 3D look. As you can notice, if we turn the displacement into 0, the material looks very bad and it basically looks flat. But if you leave it at 1 as it was before, it has depth and it looks way more realistic than if it was at 0. So this height map part is crucial into gaining a realistic look into your materials. So keep in mind, always be aware of this section. We can change the brick material. If we go more to the right, you can see that it's getting deeper and sometimes it makes it look better, but at this instance, it's way too extreme and we wouldn't need it at this much displacement. You can also use the displacement map in a negative displacement mode, which basically wouldn't work in this instance either. But in case you need to do that in case you need to do that for other materials, you can use that in a different type of way to achieve a certain look. The reflections section also has another texture that basically shows which areas need to reflect more and which areas need to reflect less. It makes the whole material look way more realistic and you can just play with a specular option, which is basically how much you want the material to shine, but in this case I'm going to leave it at default because it looks just fine. This is pretty much all the options that you would have and all the things you can go through with a brick material. Obviously, if you want to change the dimensions of it, you can do that either in the SketchUp tab. So let's say I want to make it bigger, something like 140. As you can see, it's bigger, maybe it looks even more realistic. So we're gonna leave it like this, but you can also make changes here in the albedo map that I showed you earlier. Alright, so we have tried out using material from the Enscape library, but what if you need some specific material that Enscape doesn't offer? So if you need a specific kind of material that Enscape doesn't offer, you would basically need to download it online in some websites. The one that I like is engcg.com. I'm not sponsored by them, they're not paying me to say this, but I really find their materials quite useful for my workflow. Let's say we want to use a pavement material in order to change the pavement. So we can just type in pavement and you have a lot of high quality PBR materials that you can use for your project. So I want to download this one and I'm going to download it as a 2K quality PNG. I'm just going to click it and the download is going to start. Once the download finishes, you'll have to open up a zip file which has all the different maps that you will need for the pavement. So you're gonna need to copy all of these and put them in a new folder. So here I have all the maps for my pavement that I'm gonna use in my project. So I'm gonna go back to our tab here. In order to change the existing pavement, I'm gonna select it and I'm gonna click this icon right here. So once I click that, I'm gonna find where I saved the pavement that we downloaded and I'm gonna choose the picture which has color written in it. So as you can see, all the pavement that we had previously is now replaced with the new pavement. But there's still some things that we have to change. So firstly, I need the pavement to be bigger than it is right now. I'm gonna make it 300 centimeters by 300 centimeters. This looks more like a real life size. But now the displacement that we had with the previous pavement, as you can see, is applied to the pavement that we have now. In order to change that, we're going to open the material editor once again, and we're going to take off all of the maps that this has. So now it looks flat, it has almost no reflection, and is basically at a default look. So what we need to do is we need to go to the height map. We're going to click this file at the texture section, and we're going to upload the displacement map. So once we upload the displacement map, we're going to click at the type option and we're going to choose displacement. Now, as you can see, we're going to lower it down a bit. We're going to put the displacement at 0.4. And now we're going to add the reflection map from the same file that we downloaded it. So basically, the reflection map is named as roughness. And as you can see, we have a realistic material that we imported ourselves. Now we imported our own material with all the realistic parameters. Okay, so once your materials are set up in your project, now we're going to take a look at the asset library. So the asset library is another very useful tool that Enscape has. In the asset library, there are over 3,000 objects for you ready to use in your project and all of that. What this picture is missing right now is some vegetation. As you can see, there's different categories and you can use the favorite icon just like in the material. So we're going to go to the vegetation category and you can even find tags for different type of vegetation. Let's say we need some trees, we can just click trees and you have a list of all the trees that Enscape offers. But you can access the Enscape library in two different ways. You can access it from the SketchUp window and you can access it from the Enscape window. So let's take a look at the options that the asset library from the Enscape window offers. So I'm going to open it up and it has all the Enscape assets just like before. We're going to go back to vegetation and we're going to click the tags on trees. Let's say we want to place a tree onto our object. We can do that quite easily by just clicking in it and then selecting the place that we want it to be. As you can see, the tree is showing up as a very simple modeling. That's because we haven't clicked the apply changes button yet. And once we click that, you will see that the tree shows up very high quality, very easy to use, and we can do that with any other of the assets. But there's a really cool option to place vegetation that Enscape offers as well. So there is the multi-asset placement, which basically does automatic placement for you if you have a larger area. So let's try this with trees. We're going to use the bucket selection and we're going to select the area that we have right here. Once you're selected, we're going to choose some trees that we would like to use. I'm going to select that one. I'm going to select another one. Let's say 3 types of trees. Once you select that, we have the option to choose how dense you want them to be. So how many trees you want this area to have. And you can also change the rotation of the trees. So you can have them rotated at the same direction, or you can do random rotation, which will be very useful for trees. That way they don't look very identical. So let's see, this is how we want our trees to look and the area to be. Now, in order to see that, we can just click preview selected area and the assets will be placed onto the zone that we selected with Enscape. And as you can see, we already have automatic placement of all the trees pre-selected in Enscape. If you want to confirm this and leave it as it is, we can just select confirm placement. Now, the other option that we have in order to use the multi-asset placement is the circular selection. So the circular selection would be a great tool to use for something like leaves. So I'm going to type in leaves. I'm going to take off the tags and I'm going to use these leaves. I'm going to select the circular selection. So there will be one click for the center of the circle and another click for the radius of the circle. So I'm going to select this. And as you can see, we can change the density on how many leaves we want placed there, and we can change the rotation. We can leave it uniform or random. So let's preview the selected area. And as you can see, we have leaves only in the circular selection that we did. Another very useful option is using the rectangular selection. So the rectangular selection is useful for things that are more uniform and more regular, I guess. At least that's what I use it for. And we can use that, for example, for street lights. So I'm going to select a street light, something like this. I'm going to select the starting point from here up to here. Now we're going to change the width of it because we don't need this much trees. I'm going to turn off the random rotation, and we're going to turn off the density to, let's say, something like 4 street lights. Now the rotation is not headed to the correct way, which should be on the street, but we can change that after. It's not a big deal. So we're just going to press preview selected area, and then we can just use the rotation. We can apply changes, and then we can click the rotation tool. We're going to click each one of them and rotate them either in Enscape, or what would be even more useful and easier to use, which is what I usually do in my projects, is to rotate them in SketchUp. So I'm just going to select this, and this. So I'm just going to select them one by one and rotate them. So this is what the scene looks like after placing all the assets. I placed some cars, as you can see, bicycles, as well as people and characters. Enscape has some of the highest quality characters of all other rendering engines that I've tried out, so you can always count on the characters from Enscape to look realistic, and you won't really need post-production for people and just wasting your time with the shadows and all that. If you're finding this video useful, believe me, this is just a fraction of what I show in the Enscape X Recorders, which you can find in the link in the description, and it has a limited time offer. And just go straight to the advanced level, very quick, just like that. So now that we have placed the assets and made some changes to the materials of the building, we can start looking at the composition and the angles that we want to take. For the composition, we are going to have to open the visual settings, which is in the top right corner of Enscape right here. So the first 2 most important options for composition are pretty close to each other, and which is the projection, which is basically the perspective, as well as the field of view. So what I would suggest you is to 90% of the time use the 2-point perspective. Only use the 3-point perspective if you're making aerial shots to something like this, because it's way more suitable. If I choose the 2-point perspective for aerial shots, you will see that the whole building is distorted and not very realistic. 2-point perspective is always used in architectural photography and all of that. Obviously in real life we see with 3 points perspective, but 2 points perspective is just way better for architectural renderings. And the difference between the two are that the 2-point perspective will keep the vertical lines always straight. So right now you can see the vertical lines right here, and if we choose the 3-point perspective, you can see that the lines now are not as straight, and it just doesn't have a good look in terms of composition. So I'm going to go back. So I did change the perspective even here in this section, and I can use 2-point. As you can see, the building now is way better composed. Now the field of view is usually set at 90 degrees in Enscape as default, which works fine in some images, but I usually like to leave it lower at something like 60, 65. But a higher field of view is always used in interior images for real estate. If that's your target with renders, you should probably keep a higher field of view because it always has the illusion that the root is bigger than it actually is. But for this shot, I'm going to keep it at 65 degrees. So now that you have set up the perspective as well as the field of view, you want to make sure you find a good camera angle. So once you find a good camera angle, you want to make sure that you are saving that angle for later. So for example, if I go here and I like this angle, I'm going to go at the views management option in the top left corner and press the F. So once I press the F key, I can click create view and click create once again. Now, even if I move around and I want to go back to the view that I previously was, I can just click this icon and go to the Enscape C6. So once I click that, it takes me back there. This saves a lot of time. Believe me, if you set this up correctly, you won't have to find the angles that you've once had and now you try to go back to it, you can just do it with one click. So this is pretty basic. This is just something that makes your workflow a lot easier. So something else that you can do with the composition is use the save frame tool. So this is very useful in case you have changed the aspect ratio here at the output. So I chose 2000 by 2250 and it has a 0.9 aspect ratio. But as you can see, the Enscape window isn't showing that. It has a full screen view, which is not very useful if I'm trying to get a look at how my angle looks like. So in order to do that, I can just click the same frame option. Now as you can see, the screen in Enscape is showing the aspect ratio that I want. Okay, so now we have gotten the composition, we have gotten the materials, and we have gotten the assets that we want to use in our project. So I'm going to take a look at the visual settings, which is usually the final part when I want to create renders. Once I click this, you can see that there are 5 different sections of the visual settings. Here you can find the style that you want to use for your renders. So we have the mode, which is none right now, but you can also do the white mode, which basically takes off all the materials and makes the camera projection. We went over that, is basically the perspective. And then we have the exposure. We can either use auto exposure or we can choose the exposure ourselves and then tune it up in post-production. But for this image, I'm just going to leave it at auto exposure because it works fine for me. The field of view went over that in the composition. And then next up, we have the depth of field. So depth of field is kind of the blurred effect on renders. So in order to use the depth of field, I'm going to make it a bit higher. You can either do autofocus, which basically lets Enscape choose your focus points where you don't want it blurred, but I never use the autofocus mode, or you can do the focal point yourself. So as you can see in the Enscape tab, there is a white line moving, and this is basically showing you where the camera is focusing it. So if I go here, everything else is blurrish except this area right here. So you can see the people are blurred, the bikes are blurred and all of that. But I want the field of view to be closer. I can just go back a bit, and as you can see, person right here is less blurred and the end of the building is more blurred. We can also tone down the depth of field to have less blur, and as you can see, it's blurring the back of the building and focusing us on the front of the building. For this render, we're now going to use this option, and we also have rendering quality. So this is very useful in case your computer cannot run Enscape properly. I leave my rendering quality at ultra, but in case you can't handle that while working, while you're creating a project, you can leave it at draft, which lowers down the quality of your project, but also lowers the computer power that it needs to be rendered. So while you're working, you can leave this at draft, and then when you're actually ready to make the render, you can turn up the rendering quality to the highest that your computer can handle. So I'm just gonna go back to ultra. Next up, we have the image section. So the first thing that you can notice in the image section is the contrast. We can either leave it at auto contrast or we can change the highlights and shadows option ourselves. If you're a beginner, I would suggest you to leave this on. I myself have made a little bit of changes in this, but not too much. So I'm going to turn the highlights a bit more on, which makes the wider parts of the image brighter. And turn the shadows a bit down, that way this area here is better lit up. And then for the saturation, I would always suggest you to make it a little bit higher than the default Enscape setting. And that's just because the default Enscape setting, I believe, has very low saturation. I like to leave mine anywhere between 105 to 110. For this image, I can just leave it at 108 and it looks quite good. And the color temperature is basically a tint that you can add onto your render. This makes it warmer and this makes it cooler, but I'm just going to go back to default, and you can do that with any of these settings just by clicking this arrow right here. So now it has gone back to the default Enscape settings. These effects are something that I rarely ever use and I don't find useful at all. But if you want to create kind of a more different and interesting look, you can kind of use these, but make sure to not overuse them because I see that very often in renders. I turned on the vignette for this because I wanted to make it more dramatic, but I still believe that it looks good and is not too overused in this image. And then the chromatic aberration, I never use this. It basically makes the image sharpness a lot lower. Now we can move on to the atmosphere settings, and the atmosphere settings are useful if you're not using HDRI. But I'm using HDRI in this image, but we're going to go over that later. So for now, I'm just going to take that off. So now we have the default Enscape sky. So for the default Enscape sky, we can change the sun brightness and all of that. So first off, we have the fog option. We can change the fog intensity here. We can make the image more foggy, or we can turn it down to not look foggy at all. I had it at around 20% for mine, which is, I guess, fine. You can't really tell anyway, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. The height basically shows where you want the fog to be. You can leave it at a higher area, or you can bring it back down, but not much to play with that anyway. We're gonna go to the illumination. These are some of the lighting settings that Enscape offers. The sun brightness is pretty self-explanatory, but please never leave the sun brightness at the default Enscape settings because it's just way too high. So an image like this is not something that you want. It's way too bright and it just doesn't look realistic. I like to leave my sun brightness anywhere between 5% to 15%. So I'm gonna leave it at 10% for this one, which I believe looks okay. The nighttime brightness, obviously we don't need this in our daytime renders. The shadow sharpness, I always leave it low because the less sharpness the shadows have, the softer the lighting appears. So for this one, I'm just gonna leave it at 0%. For the artificial light brightness, this basically changes the artificial lights that we have put in. We can take a look at this exterior light and how it affects it. So if you turn it down, there's no light. And then while you go up, you can see the light appear right here. The ambient brightness is brightness that is in interior shots mostly. This affects interior shots. Right here, there's not much effect, so we can just leave it that at whatever. The weight option is very useful in case you're doing animations, but we're not going to do that for this video, so we're just going to leave that at 0. So now we're going to go to the sky option. So at the sky option, we can choose clear for now, but we can also do white background in case you're trying to do something different like textures or axonometry looks, but in this render, that's not useful at all. And then the options that we have in the source of the horizon is the clear option, desert option. So as you can see, the background is a desert now, forest. We also have the mountains, construction site, and all of that, which I'm not going to go through all of them. They're pretty self-explanatory. But what I always do to get the highest quality results with lighting is import my own HDRIs. So HDRIs are basically images that were taken in real life, and you can import them in here to have the most realistic, the closest to real life lighting in your renders. So I'm going to load Skybox from file. I'm going to open up this midday HDRI. So as you can see, the lighting and the sky looks way more natural than before. You can see even the background looks way more natural because it was taken in real life. This is why I always suggest use HDRIs instead of the default Enscape sky setting. If you're using an HDRI as well, you have the brightest point as sun direction, which basically makes the brightest point in the HDRI, which is right there, and Enscape identifies it as sun and makes all the light come from there. So I'm going to choose that because it makes it more realistic. And here you can change the brightness of the HDRI, which works in contrast to the sun brightness actually. So if we lower it, as you can see, the sun brightness goes up, but the sky brightness goes down. So I'm going to turn that back to default because it looks all right in the default form that it has. And then finally, at the output, you have the resolution which you want to choose. For this, I'm going to keep a vertical aspect ratio, but there's some default presets. The most useful ones, I would suggest you to use either Full HD or Ultra HD. And then you can also use the viewport aspect ratio, which I wouldn't recommend either. Either is much better if you set your own resolution. And then you have the options to use the export object IDs and all of that in case you want to do post-production in Photoshop and all of that. You can choose the file format, and also there's some other options if you're doing panoramic views or video. Now to render this image, we have set up everything, the materials, the lighting, the visual settings, the assets. Now the only thing we need to do is render it. So in order to render it, we have this option in the top left corner, which is types and screenshot. We can either click that or use the Shift and F11 shortcut. I'm going to click it and I'm going to choose my destination and I'm just going to click save. So once that is done, you can see that Enscape has started to export our image, and basically these are the results. Alright, so this is the end of the video. These are the results we have gotten from these renders. If you've learned anything, please make sure to click the like button and subscribe to the channel, as well as make sure to enroll in the course in the link in the description. There's a limited time offer. Believe me, it is worth all of the money because it will get you so many shortcuts to becoming an advanced user and an Enscape expert. See you in the next time.